Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
Hi, and welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. I'm your host, Tom Bourne, and with me today is the marvellous Tristan Casey. Tristan, how are you?
Oh, good, mate. Thank you so much for having me along. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's always good to get highly educated, highly qualified, and highly experienced people like yourself on. All right, Tristan, you're well known in a lot of health and safety circles, but what was the seed? Where did it begin for you?
Yeah, great question. I love asking this one too to my workshops and audiences because you get such interesting answers. I started my life wanting to be an engineer of all things, and then for whatever reason, decided, hey, I'll do psychology because I love, observing people. Not necessarily interacting with them all the time, but I love to watch them and understand what makes them tick. And I think safety really satisfies that for me because it's this blend of people and technology coming together. It's this sort of nerdy side that I really love to invest in, which is innovative new technologies, keeping up to date with all the advancements there. But how do people use them in ways that really make a difference and extend or augment their performance? So safety, I think, is a little bit like that. We deal with hazardous technologies. We know, what risk they pose, but also we can use them to improve and enhance ourselves in our performance. So I really like that blend of the two worlds coming together.
Not one of those people that goes to a cafe and is sort of happy to sip on the coffee while watching the crowd go by and try and work out what their story is, are you?
I don't know about working out the story. I do love the people watch, but more just for like a meditative sort of, chill effect rather than, oh, I wonder what issues that person's got at home or something. No,
Yeah.
not up for that.
Oh, good. I'd be worried if you were.
Yeah.
All right. Tristan, what are you doing currently now professionally?
Yeah, it's a complex story. So I went to the UK for a year to get that little bug out of my system, just to go and travel and to take the family and do a few things. But now I'm back. I'm at Queensland University of Technology, so I'm at a university here in Brisbane and doing a bunch of interesting research projects, but also doing my own little side business, UV safety, little side hustle. Yeah, so there's plenty to keep me busy, I think, in the health and safety space at the moment. It's a good time.
Okay. Are you working with Nectarius here?
Oh, I yeah, obviously know him well, and haven't got a project with him yet, but we have had a few chats. Yeah,
Ah, good. All right. You mentioned New View Safety. Tell us a little bit about that.
sure. So as I mentioned, it's just a little side gig for me. It's something to keep me in the health and safety training space, actually. So doing, I guess, trying to translate some of these ideas that you probably have heard of, new view concepts like safety differently and pop and all those different flavors, trying to make sense of them and turn them into practical tools because I think there's a lot of pontificating and theorizing about these ideas, but not a lot of, well, how do you do it? What's the actual implementation of this look like? So myself and Kim Bancroft put this concept together, and yeah, we've just been doing a bit of training on the side.
You mean the marvelous Kim Bancroft?
Well, I'm wonderful and she's marvelous, so we make a good
Ah,
team.
look at that. Look, I gotta say, that's that is the one thing I could probably use with learning about is the practical application
Mm,
because big fan. You can see from a sort of philosophical view, new view safety. It's so much better than what we were doing with behaviorism, in my opinion, anyhow.
sure.
But I do worry about some of the practical applications with it, and I see people who the light bulb gets switched on for safety to new view, etc., and that they're all enthusiastic, and then they try and implement things to the workplace, and that's where it stalls.
Mm.
Um, are you finding that's a common theme for people?
I think so. And I had this discussion just the other day in a class, or yesterday actually, because people were saying, well, there's this risk of safety going down the flavor of the month um, sort of avenue, or just the campaigns that come, endlessly cycling through an organization of, well, here's what we're doing this year, and now we've got a new safety manager or a new CEO will do something new. And I think they're really missing the point of what new view concepts are all about, which is really a different mindset or a philosophical shift in thinking. So it's not something you can just put people through a training program and say, yes, we've ticked the hot box and we're all hoppers now. It's deeper. It's sort of thinking, well, how do we actually, reimagine the way that everything in our organization works, the reporting structures, the HR function. It's bigger than safety, I think. And I think a lot of people forget or fail to realize that it is a fundamental change than just a flash in the pan sort of initiative.
How do we go from having a system in place with new view safety, perhaps even learning teams, for example, and then we change the CEO, the manager, director, and they think that's all rubbish, and we go straight back 5 or 10 years in time? How do we stop that? How do we embed this so it's not going to be a sort of a flip-flop thing in organizations?
Yeah, great one. It's a complex answer, I think. So if we think about those training campaigns or the superficial implementations, they really just skim the surface. They might change a little bit of behavior for a while, or they might sort of, adjust their attitudes, but they don't get down to the core of the organization, which is, embedded into the policies, the tools, the procedures, and then even the fundamentals of the culture, the shared beliefs and assumptions that people have. So they just don't go deep enough. When we talk about the survivability or sustainability of new view concepts, that the thought that came to my mind, Tom, was really, ensuring that the people recruiting the CEO or the new executive are on board on that journey. So the boards, the executive boards or the highest levels of the organization's governance, when they're out looking for a CEO, they should be searching for someone that has a similar mindset to that sort of appreciates the hop or the new view kind of philosophy. So I think, without touching all pieces of the organization from the bottom right to the top and kind of having a shared set of values around this approach, then it does run the risk of going backwards when, they'll get a new CEO in, for example, and things will just revert back to how they were.
Yeah. Spoke earlier this year to John Shattuck from Sunstrom Recruitment, and they deal primarily in health and safety recruitment. And he was suggesting that one of the key things for any business is when they're recruiting safety personnel is to have that sort of philosophical argument about what you believe in before you actually hire someone, because it's those decisions, if you have the mismatch of beliefs, that can cause you grief. I guess that would be true for anywhere in the organization. The higher up, the more important those sort of conversations are.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is your recruitment process is what sorts of interview questions you're posing, and are you really getting a good sense of the mindset or the philosophy that person uses as they go about their practice in any organization. So we can ask people sort of superficial things like, where have you done really well? What's your last safety initiative that worked excellently, and how did you do it, sort of thing. But we often fail, like you mentioned, to really dig deep and understand, what is their perspective on these issues. And I mean, I don't want to seem like I'm advocating that we should just replace everyone with, hop enthusiasts. I think we can have shared values. People can have a shared sense of purpose and meaning, and sort of the fundamentals of what it means to be part of a community in an organization. But we can have diversity of thought. We can have people that are critical, challenge. The last thing we probably want is an organization, if we're truly believing in this hop mentality or this new view mentality, is a very homogenous, sort of consistent way of thinking. That's kind of the old way, behaviors. If only we can get everyone to care more, to really think the exact same way and program them to think like that, then our safety challenges and our performance challenges will be gone. We know that diversity of thought and different perspectives are so important, but we also need a bit of consistency. It's this paradox of sort of diversity and alignment that we need to balance and tread very carefully on.
Yeah. Oh, come to paradoxes very shortly. I was just thinking, you teach these new principles, you teach these new beliefs to people, and I don't know. I've dabbled around the vet sector for over a decade at least. Dabbled's a light word, but anyhow, are we likely to see a nationally accredited program that'll teach some of the principles behind this?
Yeah, well, I wonder. I guess that's for something to sort of get through the accreditation process and become an endorsed course. There's a lot of hurdles that you probably need to go through. I know a little bit about it, but I, I suspect that I don't know. It's actually a really good question because I was going to say the regulations and law probably needs to evolve to sort of make that business case or that sort of requirement become more apparent. But a lot of the legislation, I believe, really does already have new view principles baked into it. This sort of idea of employee consultation and involvement, this idea of even due diligence, executives and officers getting out into the field to understand the nuances of their business. That's the real essence of the legislation. It's really got new view flavor to it. But the way that we've sort of interpreted that and used it is it's become more bureaucratic and compliance based. So I sort of think it's sort of a bigger like societal change that needs to happen for that to flow through and affect those sorts of structures. Yeah.
Yeah, believe it or not, some of the things I've seen being taught today in current safety courses still include pyramids or triangles, still include cheese, and all those sort of wonderful things that you'd think we're starting to move away from. But no, dominoes, all those wonderful, lovely things, that simplistic ideas, they're still being taught. And the scary thing for me is we're going to have a brand new lot of safety practitioners starting on their journey who are still believing the validity in those arguments, and it's frustrating. I still have students who quote back to me, Heinrich's pyramid and why it's so wonderful and that, and you go, well, no, it's not. But that was a great.
Tom.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, Tom, like I that's really relevant to me at the moment because just this week I sort of asked myself the question. There was a job I was working on for someone in Perth, and the client posed this question about the similar challenge: does the triangle exist? Is it valid? And I sort of think, like, everyone trashes it, but what evidence do we actually have for this? And I went out and did a little bit of a systematic review of all the existing publications. I think I got 9. So there's not that much study that's really looked specifically at Heinrich's triangle. I guess fortunately or unfortunately for some, it did sort of suggest that the evidence is extremely limited that it's valid. But there is some little snippet there to say that in certain contexts, the smaller kind of near miss, the low hanging fruit can be correlated with the more significant incident outcomes. A very weak correlation, but what it's really saying is that Heinrich kind of isn't. I don't think he should be trashed necessarily. He's one of a very influential, sort of. It's just how it's taught. If it's taught as part of the evolution of safety thinking, and this is one of our forefathers, or forepeople, someone that's really thought about this and come up with an interesting theory that stuck. That's kind of a good way of framing it, because he did influence, James Reason. He did influence to some extent more of the complex systems thinking ideas in a very weak way, but that really set us on our journey. And so I think it's something that we should hold on to, but the way we kind of put it on a pedestal and promote it is probably not the right way to go.
Yeah, look, my worry with teaching it, even as a historical, in a historical context, is for me, a lot of students are almost overwhelmed with the information and data we're giving to them in a short period of time. And the danger for me is we're actually giving it by even talking about it, we're actually giving it validity, at least in some students' minds. So that's what I worry about. If a student talks to me about it, I talk back, but otherwise I leave it in the dusty bookshelf sort of stage. All right. Speaking of things that refuse to disappear, in the last 2 weeks, I've spoken to 3 highly intelligent people who have come out literally and said the worker is 100% responsible for their own safety on site. It's like a weed behaviorism, isn't it? You think you've pulled it out of your garden, and all of a sudden it's back there, and it's a stubborn beast to remove. Why do you reckon it is?
Um, well, I guess to sort of respond to that, there's a kernel of truth in everything that everyone says, because their perception of reality is real for them. So, when we say things like 90% of incidents are caused by human behavior, of course, but it depends what perspective you're looking from. We could say 90% are caused by, a crappy procedure, or we could say that it is a human behavior in terms of who designed and put that procedure in the first place. It's the behavior that created that procedure. So, when you start to categorize things like that, it becomes a little bit nonsensical. I think the real issue we have is kind of this assumption that business owners have that, well, I can only do so much, and I want to push that responsibility down the line to say that it's all you that's kind of responsible for your own protection. So I think from a business perspective, it can be appealing. It kind of solves that problem that, leaders only have so much time. They're very, pulled and pushed in different directions. And the last thing they want to have is yet another responsibility to make sure that people are safe. And, they're not all leaders, but that is a temptation. So I think the attractiveness of like behavioral safety and the new flavor of it, which is cognitive safety or even human performance to some extent, this idea that you've got to have good situational awareness, you've got to care about safety, you've got to make it personal. Like it is part of the answer, a very small part of the answer. But I think our emphasis, the pendulum, should be swung more towards the systems thinking ideas that, as an employer, as a leader, as someone with authority and influence in the business, I can have such a greater impact over my people through the actions that I do, rather than expecting all of them to do something different. That's kind of my take on it.
All right. Are you a fan of learning teams?
A fan? I think they're good, but I think that that's just a concept that's very messy. It's sort of this thing that people say they do, but everyone does them differently. And not that they have to be consistent and have a structured process, but I guess I doubt how effective they are when there's no sort of agreed process to go through. People are just figuring it out themselves, and that might be a good outcome, it might be a poor outcome. And it requires quite advanced facilitation skills, I think, to do it correctly. And I'm not sure that all safety professionals would have that ability.
Yeah. I'm going to say something that might upset us a few people, but I just thought about it a moment ago. It sort of came to me. Learning teams, getting workers to decide on how to, use their expertise to come up at how to do the jobs, like, well, I don't know, a bit like what we were supposed to do with job hazard analysis, job safety analysis, et cetera, et cetera. Isn't that just another form of making the worker responsible for their own safety?
Yeah, let me think about that one. I don't think there's any problems with workers accepting some responsibility for safety. It's more, I think, when that is a one-way street and it's sort of a top-down pushing of that responsibility away from the organization. So I think the beauty of a learning team, or even sort of like a JSA or some sort of group process where you all come together to discuss risk and identify solutions, is a partnership. It's a joint responsibility. It's sort of this symbolic kind of handshake between two or more parties to say, look, you come up with solutions, we'll make them happen. We'll enable your voice to be heard, but we'll also do our part to change the system so that it actually improves it for everyone. So yeah, I think it's not a bad thing that we want people to be responsible, but it's about the organization also accepting their responsibility for change and improvement.
Good. Any concerns about that learning teams where workers are empowered to make these decisions, they might settle on solutions that don't meet minimum standards in regulations, for example?
I think it really points to who's in the room. So you could have a learning team with all the greatest intentions, but if you've got the wrong folks doing it, and by wrong, I mean people who may not have the necessary knowledge about the technical aspects of the job, people who are disengaged or not really vocal in their criticisms or ideas. The composition of that team is really critical. Perhaps the safety person or the advisor that's facilitating or there as a technical expert could sort of assume responsibility for that kind of regulation or legislative lens. I think one of the mistakes we could make with learning teams is not really being clear about the roles and the duties of each member. So I suspect that in some organizations, it's just a bit of a, hey, we'll gather a few folks together, we'll get in a room, we'll talk about stuff, and we'll come up with some ideas. But that formalized aspect, there's nothing I think wrong with trying to increase the transparency and structure and formalization of a learning team process to make it more effective.
Yeah, good. You're in lovely Queensland, second greatest state in Australia. Tell me, and you're a highly intelligent man, Queensland has codes of practice that are legally enforceable. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Yeah, I guess my understanding is that they can be admitted as evidence in court that you've done all you can reasonably practicable. So, yeah, I think we got to be careful on the language there that, an inspector's not going to have a code of practice with a checklist and say, you didn't do it this exact way, so therefore you're non-compliant. So, sorry, what was the question, Tom? You're asking about codes of practice?
Codes of practice in Queensland, they are actually legally enforceable. In most other states, they're seen as best practice guidance documents, which could be used then as evidence, but not legally enforceable.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good thing. Oh, sure. Well, I think, I think anywhere that we've kind of narrowing the railroad, it depends on the context of the situation. So if it's something where it's extremely high risk, we know the hazard extremely well, and we know the controls or practices that mitigate that the best way, then perhaps that is a good idea. But if there's more flexibility required, or the situation's more ambiguous, or there's the context really matters, I think, around making things very prescriptive or quite flexible and goal-based. So, I don't have an issue with the fact that in Queensland and other states, there's specific regulations for high-risk construction work. I think that makes sense. Whereas more general workplaces have that flexibility to be able to figure out the best way that they think, with some evidence or backing, confirmation of that this is how we'll manage that process. So, yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing. It just depends in what context they're made prescriptive.
Good. All right. I recently got the chance to attend a lovely meeting where you discussed safety paradoxes.
Yeah.
We only had a limited number of people, which is a shame. But for those who weren't lucky enough to hear and see you, can you elaborate on that for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I think we've touched on it tangentially a little bit today already, which is this idea that anything in an extreme is something that we should be a bit skeptical about. So what I mean by that is if we're focusing exclusively on individual behavior, if we're focusing a lot on empowerment and turning the organization upside down and shaking everything out, then that's an extreme view as well. And paradox tells us that there's these sort of seemingly contradictory goals that we're trying to achieve. So when it comes to safety, there's a few that come to mind. There's prevention versus promotion. There's flexibility versus stability. Sort of compliance versus proactivity. There's a whole host of, so safety is just this rich kind of paradox-filled discipline. And we're sort of tempted psychologically to just solve that paradox by choosing one end of the goal over the other. So we might say, well, we've got this tension between, people being consistent and wanting them to be creative and innovative. Let's just err on the side of caution and, really proceduralize our organization and choose the compliance option, because that seems like the method that's worked the best for safety over the past decade or, 50 years or so. So we've got this temptation to choose the option that kind of is the easier option, or the one that's been proven in their eyes or the person's eyes to make sense, based upon past performance. So paradoxical thinking in safety suggests, well, let's try and bring the opposing goals together. Let's try and blend, the old view and the new view together. Let's integrate. Let's seek the complex solutions to these tricky challenges, rather than just trying to, throw out the old and bring in the new, or stick to the old and ignore the new. That's kind of my lay person's explanation of it.
That's excellent. All right. Psychological safety. Been around for as long as I've been alive, at least, as I believe. But certainly, I won't say flavour of the month for the last 2 years, but certainly gained a lot more attention. Any advice for businesses on how to actually effectively manage psychosocial risks in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a good one. I did a webinar on this earlier in the week, so it's very fresh. I guess before I answer that, I wanted to say something a little bit controversial, which is, I'm not sure that that the way that many regulators and guidance kind of documents have taken this issue is they've just taken everything from physical safety and plonked it down in the psychosocial space. And what I mean by that is there's the traditional risk management wheel. There's, this is how you kind of manage the risk. You do it, the assessment, you eliminate or reduce as possible. The hierarchy of controls gets applied. And I'm not sure that's the best way, because we know from theories like the job demands resources model that some types of hazards, sort of like time pressure and we call them challenge stresses. They're not inherently bad in themselves. If they're in extreme, or if they're not coupled with enough support, certainly they can be detrimental over the long term. But to sort of just apply this blanket, hierarchy to say every kind of psychosocial hazard we have to get rid of or reduce as much as possible, I think is really a tough gig for organizations, and maybe not in the best interest of the employees. Just a quick example, I liken it to being outside and having sun exposure. A bit of sun exposure is good for vitamin D and health and well-being, but too much, obviously, you get sunburn and cancers and all sorts of terrible things. So, psychosocial risk is a bit like that. We want a little bit of demand and a little bit of pressure and tension to keep us sort of stimulated and activated in the workplace, to keep us engaged, but not too much. And we also need that support to offset it and provide the enabling conditions to be successful.
Yeah, look, hallelujah. I have been worried that this for quite a while. Seriously, I was looking at the traditional hierarchy control and trying in my head to somehow apply that to psychosocial hazards, because that's what the new regulations say. You've got to treat them exactly the same way. And I go, okay, eliminate psychosocial hazards. Well, the only way you can do that is get rid of people out of your organization, because so long as people are interacting, there's always going to be at least the risk of a psychosocial substitute. What do? You substitute people with robots. I guess that's the only way I can see that happening. Let's go isolate. I don't know, we get the people who are the problem and we get them to work from home, so they don't interact with people. They can't take part in conferences. They can't email. That itself is a risk. Engineering. How do you engineer? Do you just basically put blinkers and earmuffs on people so they can't talk to? I think it's a nonsense. I really do. I struggle. And the one that really the only control measures category that fits the bill is administration, which is training and more bloody paperwork and more procedures, so I'm with you. I think trying to get people to treat, or trying to actually say, this is the law, we must treat it the same way we do physical hazards. Yeah, it's great that we're treating it with as much importance, but it's just nonsense. It just won't work.
Yes, it's a tough challenge. I think, if you think of solution, maybe there are some, non-negotiable hazards that do have to be eliminated completely, which are things like bullying, harassment, discrimination, those types of things. They're kind of like the minimum compliance levels. Get rid of those things. But I think everything else is a little bit more difficult to unpack. If we talk about fatigue, well, how much fatigue is appropriate? There's lots of literature on fatigue proofing and operating safely while fatigued. So going to alternate duties or lower risk tasks. That type of thing. So it's psychosocial is so much more complex, I think, than the physical space. And what we're seeing now is like our first generation of controls and guidance. We shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. We're still trying to invent and learn how to tackle these things. But I look forward to, the second and third generation legislation and guidance, which may be a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah. Yeah. I look, to be honest, bullying and harassment, sexual harassment, to me, they're not only not negotiable, they're criminal offences. They're criminal offences. And I don't know why organisations try and sweep things under the rug or move people from one workplace to another just to try and go soft. It's a criminal offence. If you spell that out right from your employment contract, what the behaviours are going to be expected, what's going to be tolerated and what will not be, I don't think anyone has an excuse. There is no one who cannot understand those basic principles, because everywhere else other than the workplace, if we break the law, we suffer the penalties and the consequences. So why we make excuses for people and look for alternative methods to modify, let's be honest, illegal behavior? Yeah, it's a tough one, but I'm not for putting everyone in jail and that, but there are some. But I look at it in the prism from my eyes. Would I want my child to be exposed to that sort of behavior? And, I'm old and I've got a bit of a tough skin, so I can tolerate a certain amount of rubbish, even if it is pushing the boundaries of being illegal behavior. But would I want my wife to put up with that? Would I want my children to put up with that? And the thing is, I think we need to start taking a stand, and we need to start thinking about what sort of workplace do we want to leave for our children and their children, because things have got to change. You talked about fatigue. It's interesting. I was speaking to someone yesterday about fatigue, and works in the resource sector, fly in and fly out. And he's telling me about a situation where on their final day, they're doing night shift and they get about 6 hours sleep before they're expected to be up, and travel 4 hours on the road to catch a plane. And he's saying, is this a real fatigue issue? And I said, tell me, what do you think it is? The employer's apparent comment was, there's 4 of you in the car. You can take turns sleeping while the other one's driving. I don't know if that really cuts the mustard, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a really interesting example. I was looking at some of the International Labour Organizations got best practice guidance around notifiable incident reporting, and they included in there any incident where there's a death or a serious injury as a result of commuting to and from work as part of an organization's notification duty. So I think stuff like that is obviously coming down the pipeline, and I'm not sure how long it will be before Australia might adjust our notifiable incident for the criteria to reflect those types of things. But employers have to be more savvy with this stuff. I think people, like you said, traveling so far and doing all these crazy hours. just to get to and from work is not sustainable.
Yeah, true. All right. What currently, you must be looking forward to some things. What currently excites you in prospects of terms in the safety world?
Yeah, what excites me? Well, on a personal note, just getting out and traveling and doing more, sort of more appearances internationally is sort of what excites me at the moment. But otherwise, in terms of more, fundamental stuff, more kind of theoretical stuff, I think just accumulating kind of more evidence that new view ideas work and are helpful. I think that's something that we've really missed up to this point. It's been a bit of an ideological journey. We said, yeah, it's great, it's awesome, let's do it. But if you look at the literature, there's not a whole host of intervention and evaluation studies that have been published yet. So we've got a bit of a lag between, industry powering ahead and the science is kind of lingering or lagging behind in some respects. We've got a lot of descriptive studies, what doesn't work and why doesn't it work, but not a lot saying that the new approaches really do what they say they do. And I think until we have that, we just have to sort of experiment and measure the outcomes and see whether we're actually making a difference.
With safety, we always tend to, I don't know. It seems we seem to focus an awful lot of time on quantitative measurements. I have some doubts about the quantitative measurements that we're basing our beliefs on the effectiveness of safety. Is there any thought that we should move to some sort of more qualitative measurements? And is there any problems with using qualitative measurements as opposed to just the straight bean counting quantitative?
Sure. Well, yeah, qualitative adds another, the quant is the what and the qual is the why. So, we can measure how much things happen or what happens, but, we're really missing that richer understanding of, well, what's the meaning that people are making of these things in the workplace. So safety itself is a construct, it's a social thing that everyone has a different interpretation of what it means to them and how it should be done in an organization. And so, to sort of reduce it to this quantitative sort of templated, here's what good looks like sort of thing and assessing ourselves against that, that serves a purpose. It's part of the picture, but it doesn't tell us, well, where do we go and kind of where have we come from in terms of the rich history of how things have come to be. So yeah, I agree. Qual plus quant is a good combination, and safety professionals probably need to get more familiar and comfortable with dealing in qualitative data. Some of the risks, I guess, is information overload. People get a whole host of qualitative comments and just think, well, how do I make sense of this? I think eventually AI will help us, and it already is helping us with topic modeling type techniques, but there'll always be a subjective human element to qualitative analysis. We have to make sense of what people are saying and group it together and categorize it and thematically analyze it. So I think the biggest risk is just our capability to deal with that data and know the techniques to analyze it with rigor and efficiency as well, because it can take a long time with the qualitative data.
Good. All right. Just one last question, Tristan. Your opinion. What's the greatest safety challenge? There are a few. What's the greatest safety challenge facing Australia currently?
Yeah, I think it's just the credibility of safety, and that's why I think the new view and pop ideas have been sort of taken up or even lapped up in some organizations, because it sort of is a fresher perspective that resonates with the front line. They say, oh, what, you actually want to talk to me now? You want to understand what I do? You want to know about the frustrations and challenges? But that also carries a risk, because if we don't act on those things, then the credibility is eroded even further. So, I think safety's got a bad rep in Australia. It's sort of this, especially in industries like mining and those other higher risk, very heavily compliance driven industries where everything is proceduralized. We can't take our toolbox from the car to the work site without a SWIMS. Just crazy stuff where we've gone too far with the documentation and evidence gathering or evidence creating. Drew Ray and Dave Progan talk about that safety of work and worker safety sort of concept, this idea that, a lot of the stuff we do in safety means well, we demonstrate it, we create a social importance for it. But ultimately, is that actually translating and flowing onto the safety of the job on, does it affect the safety of frontline workers? So I think with that concept in the back of our mind, we can start to be more critical. As safety professionals, are we adding value? Is this eroding our credibility? What do we need to do to maintain the trust and the engagement of the workers in safety moving forward? So I think Australia does have a credibility issue when it comes to safety.
I would agree 100%, as I'm sure most workers would tell you as well. Thank goodness for that. Dr. Tristan Casey, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, Tom. It's wonderful to be on the show, and hope that your listeners gain a little bit of value out of the conversation like today. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.